Ethics, or moral philosophy, is of unavoidable consequence to human beings. Because of our unique capacity for rational thought, we are capable of empathy to varying degrees. This means we are capable of observing an action and passing judgment upon that action with regard to its being committed against us. If the action is judged to be desirable, we would call it good. If the action is judged to be undesirable, we would call it bad. We are capable of further reasoning, which allows us to understand committing bad actions against others increases the likeliness of having others commit bad actions against us. This is what I would call survival instinct ethics, or instinctual ethics. These are the basic thoughts that govern how people perceive actions as morally right or wrong, though it leads to greatly varying ideas of morality from culture to culture. Morality is important to human beings because it is a byproduct of our capacity for rational thought, and thus is tied to our very nature as rational animals. Due to the fact that morality and our minds are inseparable in this way, moral philosophers are tasked with finding the best system of morality, whatever that may be. I assert that morality is universal, in that all human beings expect certain behavior from others in terms of how interactions and exchanges are conducted. I also assert that the interests of any person are not inherently more important than the interests of any other person. Therefore, no person has an inherent right to commit an action which would be wrong for another person to commit. In examining some actions which are near universally considered immoral, I will extract similar characteristics. By doing this, certain criteria for defining wrong action may be created. Before beginning, I wish to stress that actions alone carry moral value. Thoughts, concepts, ideas, objects, and animals carry no moral value. While thoughts, concepts, and ideas may lead to actions, making them rather important in this respect, they do not really exist physically and have no direct effect on others. Morality is ultimately the judgment of rightness or wrongness by those who witness that which is being judged. If thoughts cannot be known to others, they cannot be judged. Therefore, thoughts have no relevant moral value unless human beings are capable of telepathy, which they're not. Objects are not rational beings. I know, shocker. And as such, are not considered to have moral value. This reasoning remains true for animals. People, on the other hand, do have moral value because they are rational beings who execute actions. If a person commits an action, the moral value of that action is the property of that person. Thus, moral value is created by the person via the committed action and is then stored in the identity of that person. Therefore, if a person commits several bad actions, one is justified in identifying that person as bad. What then makes an action immoral? To determine this, 4 actions will be examined for similarities. They are as follows: murder, robbery, rape, and fraud. To make the morality of these actions less ambiguous, I will define some of the circumstances regarding each one. The murderer has killed in cold blood without cause, for the sole purpose of ending a life. The robber has stolen money by holding a knife to the throat of his victim, for the sole purpose of increasing his personal wealth. The rapist has forced sex upon another by threatening violence upon her victim, who is audibly refusing consent and physically resisting, for the sole purpose of some sick personal pleasure. The fraud has essentially stolen money by fabricating data to fool a client into giving him money for the sole purpose of increasing his personal wealth. So first, I'll examine the murder. As established, the murderer had no motive to kill the victim except to experience some amount of pleasure in the act itself. Thus, it was not an act of self-defense, which implies the victim was behaving peacefully. The victim's peaceful behavior implies that the first act of violence in the exchange was on the part of the murderer. It can be concluded that the murderer initiated violence upon the victim. Also, it is safe to assume that the victim would have preferred to continue living. Thus, I assert that the victim was non-consensual in his own death. Additionally, the victim, in losing his life, has been forced to forfeit something which was previously in his possession. In summation, the murderer initiated violence upon a peaceful person without consent, causing said person to forfeit their right to property. In this case, the property right which was forfeited was the victim's right to his own life. The robbery is slightly different from the murder in that the victim did not lose their life. However, the victim was still forced to forfeit their right to a property. In this case, the property was only money. Another key difference is that the robber, with his blade to the throat of his victim, was using the threat of death to force the victim to cooperate. The victim, faced with the choice to fight for her property or cooperate in the hopes of increasing the chance of survival, chose the latter. It can be assumed that the victim was behaving peacefully before the robber began to threaten her life. In summation, the robber initiated the threat of violence upon a peaceful person without consent, coercing said person into forfeiting their right to some property. The rape is similar to the robbery in that the rapist is using the threat of violence to coerce her victim into cooperating. The victim, in this case, is choosing to resist and is audibly refusing consent. The first difference between rape and robbery is, in this examination anyways, is that the property right being forfeited is the victim's right to their own body rather than the right to material possessions, such as the money in their wallet. The second difference is that the force was actually used against the victim to accomplish the goal of rape. It can again be assumed that the victim was behaving peacefully prior to being attacked. In summation, the rapist initiated the threat and use of violence upon a peaceful person without consent, coercing said person into forfeiting their right to a property. In this case, the property right which was forfeited was the victim's right to their own body. Fraud is somewhat unique when compared to the other three actions examined here. There is no initiation of physical force or even the threat of physical force. The perpetrator simply lied about something to entice a client to make a purchase of some sort. Ultimately, the perpetrator misled another person into agreeing to a contract under false pretenses. Imagine paying for a red shirt only to be informed that one has just purchased blue pants. In this way, one has been fooled into a different contract than what was expected at the time of agreement. This is a clear violation of consent, as the contract to which one was consenting was not the contract, in fact, which was activated. In summation, the act of fraud caused/enabled a non-consensual exchange of value. I will now reiterate the conclusions of these examinations. The murderer initiated force upon a peaceful person without consent, causing said person to forfeit their right to property. In this case, the property right which was forfeited was the victim's right to their life. The robber initiated the threat of violence upon a peaceful person without consent, coercing said person into forfeiting their right to some property. The rapist initiated the threat and use of violence upon a person without consent, coercing said person into forfeiting their right to property. In this case, the property which was being forfeited was the victim's right to their own body. In summation, the act of fraud caused/enabled a non-consensual exchange of value. In the cases of murder, robbery, and rape, it can be seen that all three were committed by initiating violence or the threat of violence upon a peaceful person without consent. Because the word initiation implies that the victim was not committing or threatening violence prior to the attack, I will shorten my observation of similarities to so that all three were committed by initiating violence or threat of violence upon a non-consensual person or their property. I will call this observation the first criterion. There are two very important features of the first criterion. First, the initiation of violence is a clear feature of an immoral act. Second, acting upon a person without their consent clearly violates a person's right to self-ownership. However, the first criterion does not rule out any action other than violence or the threat of violence against a person's will. Still, there is the case of fraud in which the perpetrator fulfilled a very similar goal to that of the robber without using physical violence or threats of violence. I have stated that the fraud caused/enabled a non-consensual exchange of value. Murder, robbery, and rape could all be described in this way as well, because the attacker is gaining some value from the victim which the victim did not wish to give. In this way, fraud is still immoral, even though physical violence was not used or threatened. Therefore, the second criterion shall describe those acts which cause or enable a non-consensual exchange of value. In brief interjection, it should be noted that the second criterion also renders the act of non-violent theft immoral because theft causes a non-consensual exchange of value. With the two criteria, a fairly decent definition of wrong action can be formed. However, there are some finer points which must be addressed before proceeding. The violence described in the first criterion is only of the initial sort. Is only the first violence in an exchange considered to be immoral? Is a victim permitted to use violence in the defense of their property, which includes their life, money, material things, and body from the initial violence? To this, I would say that defensive violence is morally permissible, though it is not obligatory. And that's very important. It is permissible, but not obligatory. And this is the type of moral freedom that I'm trying to offer by forming this moral theory. One cannot reasonably ask a person to remain calm as another prepares to cleave off their head. Just as morality is somewhat innate as a survival instinct, so too is the will to live. As such, it goes against the nature of human beings not to resist unwanted assault, injury, death, etc. For instance, is it immoral for a rape victim to fight back against the rapist? If one denies the permissibility of self-defense, one has condemned the victim to endure the assault with no acceptable means of escape. The most reasonable answer is to allow the victim to do everything in their power to ensure safety and survival. If such a course of action would entail retaliation against the assailant, so be it. However, it can be reasoned that if person A accidentally brushes shoulders with person B on a crowded bus, person B cannot act in self-defense by murdering person A. Therefore, I assert that an action is morally wrong if it exerts greater than the minimum required force to provide adequate defense, in addition to the previous criteria of wrong action. This I will refer to as the third criterion. I will not waste time determining what the minimum amount of force is for every situation of defense, though it should be noted that societal norms would indicate what is appropriate in many cases. As the third criterion in a set of three, it should be weighted least compared to the other two when logically determining the moral value of an action. Now, that each of these 4 actions have been examined and considerations for self-defense have been made, a generally complete definition to describe wrong action may be formed. The moral theory of obligatory inaction is as follows. We'll begin by addressing some nomenclature. Initiate, to begin or to start. Property, that which is owned by a rational being, including their life, body, land, actions, etc. Violence, physical force which obstructs a person from utilizing their property. Consent, to give permission for something to happen or agree to do something. Value, the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. Okay, with nomenclature out of the way, let's jump into the moral theory. An action is morally wrong if 1. It initiates violence or the threat of violence upon a non-consensual person or their property. 2. It causes or enables a non-consensual exchange of value. 3. It exerts greater than the minimum required force to provide adequate defense. The moral theory of obligatory inaction, or OI, only describes what is morally wrong to do. That is to say, you are obligated not to act in that way. That is to say that if an action may be described by OI, it is immoral, and all other actions which cannot be described by OI are either permissible or morally right. OI also assumes impartiality in that no person is implicitly better or worse than others, and each person's interests weigh equally. I wish to stress that OI does not prescribe any obligatory actions or duties which must be committed or fulfilled, for this is not its purpose. Essentially, OI is only describing immorality and does not define what is morally right, nor does it make any attempt to do so. As such, this theory provides each person with an equal right to the most extensive liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others, in that it restricts nothing except each person's ability to harm others. This equal right to the most extensive liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others is made possible by not outright defining right action. In doing so, OI gives no credibility to the claim that violence, force, coercion, fraud is permissible if it is used to force a person to behave righteously. This is the intention of not explicitly characterizing right action, whereas other moral theories are overly reductionist in their use of general rules to define obligatory right action in presumably every case, without considering the nuances of human interaction. The moral theory of obligatory inaction only explicitly prohibits violence, coercion, force, fraud, and excessive self-defense as wrong action, which allows for a moral agent to choose, based on specific circumstances, what right action may be. With respect to the second criterion, I must explain what is meant by value. Value is created by human beings in that metal has no value in nature, yet in the hands of human beings it becomes useful and is thus given value as a resource. Human beings place value in things they desire. Things of value to humans are typically their own lives, the lives of friends and family, time, wealth, property, resources for production, etc. It is impossible to determine all valuable things because some humans place no value in certain things which may be very valuable to others. In this way, establishing a system of consent before exchanges take place is extremely important to morality. The owner of an item must be compensated for the value of said item in an exchange. This compensation is to be agreed upon by the participants in the exchange, and the agreement is itself the consent of both parties to make the exchange. Therefore, I would define value as a thing's importance, worth, or usefulness. In a voluntary exchange, the owner of a computer may part with it for a new couch, because the couch is worth more to him than the computer. At the same time, the buyer who is exchanging her couch for the computer places greater value in the computer. This is the only way voluntary exchanges occur. At the time of the exchange, with the information that is available to both parties, both the owner and the buyer increase in value because they each value what they now have over what they had prior to the exchange. This concept of mutually beneficial exchanges is of vast importance to the system of consent and morality in general, because one-sided exchanges, also known as win-lose exchanges, only occur in the presence of violence in the form of force, coercion, or fraud. Thank you for watching this introduction to the moral theory of obligatory inaction based on the non-aggression principle. I've been working on it for some time, and working on writing a book, really, to explain it and defend it. So it's still in its early stages. I just wanted to put this idea out there so that it could be subject to criticism and debate. So please leave your comments down below and poke as many holes in it as you can, so that I can work on it and make it stronger. And I am signing off. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.